They told you to save. From the moment you were old enough to understand money, the message was clear and constant. Save a little from every paycheck. Don't spend what you don't have. Build an emergency fund. Be responsible. It sounded reasonable. It sounded adult. It sounded safe. And for a long time, it felt like the one thing you could control in a system that was already starting to feel unstable. So you listened. You skipped things you wanted. You delayed things you needed. You said, "Not now," more times than you can remember. You watched your balance grow slowly, painfully, dollar by dollar, and you were told this was progress. But somewhere along the way, something strange started happening. You were saving more, yet feeling poorer. Your account balance went up, but your life didn't. Your discipline increased, but your security didn't. Your sacrifices multiplied, but your freedom stayed exactly where it was. And the most confusing part? You did everything right. This isn't a story about reckless spending. It's not about people who blow their money on nonsense. It's not about financial irresponsibility. It's about people who followed the rules and still fell behind. Because here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to say out loud. In today's economy, saving money alone doesn't make you safer. In many cases, it quietly makes you poorer. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, invisibly, relentlessly. And by the time you notice, the damage is already done. Let's talk about why. Saving feels productive because it looks like control. When you save, you see numbers go up, that triggers relief. It feels like you're building something tangible, but money doesn't exist in a vacuum. Your savings aren't sitting still in time. They're sitting inside an economy that is constantly moving against you. Prices rise, rent climbs, healthcare costs explode, education becomes more expensive, insurance premiums quietly double. And while all of that is happening, your savings are standing still. Worse than that, they're shrinking in real value. Inflation doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't send you a bill. It doesn't show up as a withdrawal. It just slowly erodes what your money can do. The same amount buys less food, less housing, less security, less time. So when people say, "At least I have savings," what they often really mean is, "I have money that's losing power every single year." And that wouldn't be catastrophic if everything else stayed stable, but it doesn't. Here's where the real trap begins. Saving money forces you into delay mode. You delay experiences, you delay rest, you delay risk, you delay opportunity. You tell yourself you'll live later, when the numbers are bigger, when the account looks safer, when the future feels more predictable. But the system doesn't reward waiting, it punishes it. Because while you're waiting, the bar keeps moving. The down payment you were saving for gets larger. The emergency fund you finally built becomes insufficient. The enough number quietly doubles without anyone telling you. And the finish line keeps running away. Saving doesn't feel like falling behind until suddenly it does. And by then, the math no longer works in your favor. There's a deeper psychological effect nobody warns you about. Saving trains you to think small. It conditions your brain around scarcity, not growth. Around protection, not expansion. Around fear of loss, not creation of value. Every decision becomes defensive. Can I afford this? What if something happens? Better not risk it. You stop asking, what could this unlock? What could this build? What could this change? And over time, you shrink your own possibilities. Not because you lack intelligence, not because you lack discipline, but because you were taught that not losing is more important than moving forward. That mindset made sense decades ago. It doesn't anymore. Because the economy you're living in now is not designed for savers. It's designed for owners, owners of assets, owners of leverage, owners of systems that scale. Saving puts you outside that group. Your money sits on the sidelines while everything else compounds. Housing appreciates, markets rise, businesses grow, debt gets cheaper for those who already have it. And your savings account? It stays politely frozen in time, safe, predictable, and slowly irrelevant. This creates a brutal paradox. The more carefully you save, the more you avoid risk, the more you try to protect yourself. The further you drift from the mechanisms that actually build wealth. You become extremely good at survival, but terrible at escape. And survival over long periods is expensive. Most people don't realize this until something breaks. A job loss, a medical bill, a rent increase. a family emergency. Suddenly, the savings that took years to build disappear in months. And the realization hits hard. All that discipline bought time, not freedom. And time runs out faster than anyone expects. This is where the lie really reveals itself. Saving money was never supposed to make you wealthy. It was supposed to make you compliant, quiet, patient, risk-averse, grateful for stability even when stability is slowly collapsing. It keeps you focused on not drowning instead of asking why the water keeps rising. And as long as you're busy saving, you're not questioning the structure that made saving feel necessary in the first place. To understand why saving stopped working, you have to understand one uncomfortable fact. The rules didn't change overnight. They changed quietly. While people were still following them, saving money used to work. Not perfectly, but enough. One income could support a family. A savings account could protect you. A house wasn't a speculative asset, it was a place to live. Healthcare wasn't a financial landmine. Education didn't put you in decades of debt. Back then, saving was a bridge. It connected work to stability, time to security, effort to reward. That bridge is gone, but no one told you. The economy you're living in now is built on velocity, not preservation. Money that moves fast wins. Money that sits still loses. Corporations borrow aggressively. Governments print relentlessly. Markets absorb capital at scale. And savers? They're expected to stand still while everything else accelerates. This isn't accidental, it's structural. Let's talk about opportunity cost, the cost nobody shows you. Every dollar you save is a dollar you don't deploy. That sounds responsible? Until you realize what you're missing. You miss compounding, you miss ownership, you miss leverage, you miss momentum, and over long periods, momentum beats discipline. Not because discipline is bad, but because discipline without direction is containment. There's another layer that makes this even more dangerous. Saving delays feedback. When you save, nothing breaks immediately. You don't get punished today. The consequences show up years later, as regret, as exhaustion, as the feeling that time slipped away. By the time you realize saving alone wasn't enough, you're older, more cautious, and carrying more responsibility. Risk becomes scarier. Change feels heavier. Options narrow. And the system knows this. This is why the advice never updates. Just save more. Just be patient. Just wait. Waiting favors the system, not you. Because while you wait, costs rise faster than wages. Assets move further out of reach. Debt becomes normalized, and stability turns into a luxury product. Notice who saving advice is really for. It works beautifully for people who already have surplus income, asset exposure, social safety nets, access to cheap credit. For them, saving is a buffer, not a strategy. For everyone else, it becomes the strategy. And that's the problem. The economy now rewards position, not effort. Saving assumes effort will eventually translate into position. That assumption is no longer true. You can work harder than ever and still fall behind someone who simply started earlier or owned the right thing at the right time. That's not a moral judgment, it's math. And when math turns against you, discipline becomes self-punishment. You feel proud of your restraint, but restraint alone doesn't move you forward. It just slows the fall. This is where many people feel a quiet rage they can't articulate. They did what they were told, they played fair, they delayed gratification, and the reward never came. Instead, they got higher costs, more stress, less margin, constant anxiety. Saving didn't fail because you failed. It failed because it was never designed to be the final answer. Saving was never meant to make you rich. That sentence alone already sounds wrong to most people. Because for decades, saving was framed as the responsible path forward, as the foundation of a good life, as proof that you were doing things right. But saving was never designed to create wealth. It was designed to prevent collapse. That difference matters more than people realize. Saving is defensive. Wealth building is offensive. Saving protects you from emergencies. Wealth allows you to choose your life. And when you confuse protection with progress, you end up safe, but stuck. This is the quiet trap. When you save, you feel productive. You feel disciplined. You feel in control. You're doing something. And psychologically, that matters. It calms anxiety. It gives structure. It gives you a sense of responsibility in a world that feels unstable. But emotionally rewarding actions are not always economically effective ones. Saving reduces volatility in your life. It does not increase your upside. And in an economy where upside is what separates stability from struggle, that distinction becomes brutal. Most people are not poor because they spend too much. They're poor because they never cross the line from preservation to participation. They stay spectators in a system that rewards players. The system doesn't punish saving directly. It just quietly sidelines it. Your money doesn't disappear. It just loses relevance. While you're carefully preserving what you have, the cost of entry into everything that matters keeps rising. Housing, healthcare, education, even basic security. So every year you save, you feel responsible, and simultaneously fall further behind. That contradiction eats at people. It creates a specific kind of psychological exhaustion, the feeling that you're doing everything right and still losing ground. And when that happens, people don't question the rules. They question themselves. They think they're not disciplined enough, not patient enough, not smart enough, so they double down, they save harder, they cut more, they delay more life, which makes the gap even worse. This is where saving quietly turns into self-denial. Not because saving is bad, but because it's being used as a substitute for strategy. There's another uncomfortable truth here. Saving assumes the future will reward restraint. But the modern economy rewards positioning. If you are positioned correctly, even average effort compounds. If you are not positioned, no amount of discipline catches you up. That's why two people can work equally hard, save equally carefully, and end up in completely different places. One had exposure, the other had insulation. Saving insulated them from disaster, but also from opportunity. And nobody explains that part, because it sounds dangerous. It sounds like encouragement to take risk. But avoiding risk entirely is also a risk, one that compounds slowly and invisibly. This is why so many people reach their late 30s, 40s, even 50s and feel a deep, quiet panic. They don't feel reckless, they feel late. Late to assets, late to leverage, late to compounding. Saving didn't protect them from that feeling. It delayed it. And delay is expensive. Saving is supposed to buy you time. But time only matters if you use it. If saving becomes the end goal instead of the buffer, you don't buy time, you freeze it. You stay in preparation mode forever, always getting ready, never arriving. The system loves people who stay in preparation. They don't disrupt anything. They don't demand access. They don't threaten structures. They just adapt downward. That's why the advice stays the same even when reality changes. Save more, spend less, be patient. Patience in this system is obedience. And obedience doesn't get rewarded. It gets absorbed. None of this means you should stop saving. It means saving was never the destination. It was the floor. The problem is that for millions of people, the floor became the ceiling. And once that happens, every year feels heavier than the last. Because you're not moving forward. You're just trying not to fall. The moment you stop asking, how do I save more? Something uncomfortable happens. You lose the illusion of safety. Saving gives you a story you can tell yourself. I'm responsible. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protected. Growth doesn't give you that comfort. Growth forces you to admit uncertainty, exposure, risk, timing, luck, positioning. And that's exactly why the system quietly nudges people towards saving instead of building. Because saving keeps you predictable. Predictable people are easy to manage. When your financial behavior is limited to preservation, you don't challenge structures, you don't ask for leverage, you don't demand access, you wait your turn. But there is no turn. That's the part no one says out loud. The economy is not a ladder where everyone climbs at the same speed. It's a field where early positioning matters more than effort over time. And saving does not give you position. It gives you shelter. Shelter matters, but shelter alone never wins territory. Think about how often people delay action because they're not ready yet. They'll invest later, they'll take risks later, they'll start something later, after they save more, after things stabilize, after the next raise, after the next milestone. Later becomes permanent because stability never arrives in a system designed to stay unstable. Inflation isn't an accident. Volatility isn't temporary. Cost pressure isn't a phase. These are features, and in a system built on constant movement, standing still is equivalent to moving backward. This is why saving feels increasingly pointless to people, even when they're doing it right, because subconsciously they feel the mismatch. They feel that restraint is no longer rewarded proportionally. They feel that discipline without leverage is just endurance, and endurance alone doesn't build power. The uncomfortable truth is that wealth doesn't come from avoiding mistakes. It comes from surviving mistakes while being exposed to upside. Saving minimizes mistakes. It also minimizes upside, which is why people who only save often feel like life is passing them by financially, even when they're doing everything they were told. They followed the rules, they played safe, they waited, and the payoff never came. That creates resentment, not just toward the system, but toward themselves. They start to feel stupid for trusting advice that worked in a different economic era. But this isn't about intelligence, it's about outdated maps. The rules of money changed faster than the advice did, and the advice stayed simple because simple advice keeps people calm. Calm people don't revolt. Calm people don't demand structural change. Calm people blame themselves quietly. This is why the most dangerous financial myth today isn't get rich quick, it's play it safe. Because safety without growth is just slow erosion. That doesn't mean reckless behavior, it means intentional exposure. It means understanding that money sitting still is not neutral, it's decaying. It means realizing that risk isn't the enemy. Unexamined risk is. Most people take risk every day without realizing it. They risk their health by overworking. They risk their future by staying underpaid. They risk their time by waiting. But those risks don't come with upside. They come with exhaustion. The system encourages those risks because they extract value upward. The risks that benefit you, those are framed as irresponsible. And that framing is powerful. It keeps people obedient long after obedience stops working. This is the mental shift that changes everything. Saving is not a strategy. It's a buffer, and buffers are meant to be used, not hoarded, not worshipped, not mistaken for progress. Once you see that, the question changes. It stops being, how do I save more? And becomes, what am I saving for? And if the answer is just safety, you're not building a future. You're just delaying discomfort. For a lot of people, saving money isn't just a habit. It's an identity, being the responsible one, the careful one. The person who doesn't make stupid mistakes. Saving becomes proof of character, proof that you're disciplined, mature, reliable. And once that happens, questioning saving doesn't just feel risky, it feels wrong. It feels like betraying who you think you are. This is where guilt enters the picture. Spending feels irresponsible, even when it's strategic. Investing feels reckless, even when it's calculated. Taking a chance feels immoral, even when staying still is clearly hurting you. That guilt isn't natural, it's learned. It comes from years of being told that restraint equals virtue and risk equals failure. That good people wait and bad people gamble. That patience is always rewarded and ambition should be modest. Those stories made sense in a slower economy. They don't make sense in one that punishes stillness. But stories are powerful. They shape behavior long after conditions change. So people keep saving, even when it no longer serves them. They keep shrinking their lives, calling it responsibility. They keep postponing choices, calling it prudence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, their world gets smaller, not because they lack potential, but because they're afraid of violating an identity that no longer protects them. This is why conversations about money feel emotional so quickly. They're not really about numbers. They're about fear, safety, worth, and control. Saving gives a sense of control in a system where most people feel powerless. Letting go of that control, even partially, feels terrifying. But control without direction is a cage, and the system benefits from cages that people build themselves. It doesn't have to force you to stay small. It just has to convince you that staying small is moral. That's the real trick. Once you internalize that message, you police yourself. You don't need external pressure. You don't need enforcement. You keep yourself in line. And from the outside, it looks like responsibility. From the inside, it feels like anxiety that never fully turns off. Breaking out of this mindset doesn't happen all at once. It's not a dramatic moment. It's a slow reframing. You start by questioning why safety feels like the ultimate goal in a world that keeps making safety more expensive. You notice how often fear disguises itself as wisdom. You realize that not all risk is the same. Some risk extracts from you quietly. Other risk gives you leverage, learning, and upside. And you begin to separate recklessness from intention. Saving stops being sacred. It becomes practical. A tool, not an identity, a buffer, not a destination. And once that happens, something subtle but important shifts. You stop measuring success by how little you spend. You stop equating worth with restraint. You stop confusing survival with progress. You begin to ask different questions. What actually grows over time? What gives me optionality? What reduces my dependence on systems that don't care about me? Those questions don't have universal answers, but they're better questions than, how do I cut more? Because cutting has a limit. Growth doesn't. The economy doesn't reward people who avoid mistakes forever. It rewards people who are positioned to benefit when things move. Saving alone doesn't give you that position. It never did. And the longer people cling to it as a solution, the more frustrated and confused they become when it fails to deliver what it promised. You're not wrong for feeling that frustration. You were given advice that belonged to a different era, an era where patience was rewarded, stability was affordable, and progress felt linear. That era is gone. The system moved on, the advice didn't. Seeing that isn't cynical. It's realistic, and realism is the first step out of quiet self-blame. If any part of this felt uncomfortable or familiar or hit closer to home than you expected, you're not alone. This tension isn't personal. It's shared. You can leave a comment about what part of saving feels the most frustrating for you, or when you first realized it wasn't working the way you were promised. Not because there's a perfect answer waiting, but because naming the problem is how people stop carrying it alone. Saving money didn't make you poor. Believing it was enough did.